Here to talk about it with me for a few minutes is Alastair Campbell, former Director of Communications for Tony Blair. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for coming in again. You wrote about meeting the Princess of Wales, the late Princess of Wales, when she was trying to carve a different kind of relationship as a royal or a former royal. But she was never really a former royal, was she? She just remained a royal in people's minds.
Well, possibly in people's minds, but I mean...
But the reality wasn't that.
Yeah, it's very, very different. I think once you're out, you're out. And no, when we were in opposition, and you're right, not for fairly obvious reasons, I recorded this in some detail at the time. She was very keen to kind of forge a different sort of profile, role, whatever you want to call it. And obviously at that stage had been through the divorce. And I think this is very, very different, because this is a situation where Harry and Meghan, they've clearly made a choice. They've clearly thought about that choice. I think it's pretty extraordinary. It seems they haven't really discussed it in any great detail with other members of the royal household.
Or if they have, they've preempted any decision.
They've certainly taken it. Yeah. Now, whether that was because, I mean, I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder whether they worried that if they started to get into negotiation on some of the things they're now going to have to negotiate, whether they were worried they'd get talked into actually not doing it, or I don't know. But what I think will happen now, I mean, if the motivation, which I get to some extent, if the motivation is to kind of have a different sort of life, not have to deal with the media in the way that they do now, I'm not sure that's going to be the outcome of this. I think they've actually made themselves a more interesting, particularly to the hostile media.
Hostage to fortune.
A little bit. And I think that, you know, the other time I've written about the monarchy was I wrote a book about winners and the Queen, who, I mean, I'm not a natural monarchist at all, but I wrote a chapter about the Queen as a kind of enduring British winner and how she had come through so many difficult periods. And this is a difficult period. I don't actually think it does compare with the really bad times of the when all
doesn't feel to me a lot like it does.
No, I think not for her and not for the monarchy as an institution. I think there was a time. I think the whole Annus Horribilis and Diana's death, and also the Windsor fire, which I know one of the Queen's people told me was her lowest point of all, because it came on top of so much else. Yeah. But I think this is it is difficult. I think where I get a sense of where they're coming from, I do think it's not a question of them wanting necessarily a kind of sycophantic press, which of course in the certain periods of history and certain countries now other royal families get. I think it's more the sense that they feel they don't get any kind of fairness. And I think there is a lot of malice towards them. Individual journalists, individual papers, lots and lots on social media.
And yet, things like his work with Invictus, with veterans more generally,
he gets an amazing profile.
The mental health stuff, which we'll talk about, because I know you've spoken to both him and William about that. The media, the sort of formal royal correspondent end of things, has been very supportive of that, it seems to me, as have we, as has the BBC.
It reminds me a little bit of this. I keep hearing from some of Jeremy Corbyn's people that, you know, he's had the worst and the most tough character assassination of any Labour leader. They all get it. They all get it. And likewise in the royal family, I think, look, is the media less deferential than it used to be? Of course it is. Yes, there's no doubt about that. But have Meghan and Harry been treated, as it were, particularly worse? I'm not sure they have, and certainly I think I get the thing about Harry and his mum. I think both William and Harry, if you had to say to them, analyse all the reasons why your mum is dead and who killed her, I think they would put the media top of the list. In fact, I know they do, and I think so that's quite a hard thing to deal with. But actually, they've dealt with it well, and I think that Harry, you're right about Harry. He's had an amazing profile. The Invictus thing's been brilliant.
I mean, it was pioneering stuff.
And when, Fiona, my partner, she and I did a film for their Heads Together campaign, which was William, Harry, and Kate. And you know, that's the only time I've really had any kind of serious engagement with them, and I got a real sense of them being very close and very plugged into it, and doing it for the right reasons and understanding it.
And it would be a shame to lose all of that.
I hope they don't lose all that. But when I saw, I was doing Jeremy Vine's TV programme this morning, and he was sort of going through the things that they might do, and he was talking about, you know, paid speaking engagements and merchandising and all that. And I thought, oh my God, is that where this is going to go? Because if it is, I think that's a pretty dangerous territory for them to enter into.
Well, if it is, they can't then be working royals, can they?
I don't think so. I think this third way idea.
There's barely a second way, is there? Let alone a third way.
I think there is a second way, and funny enough, I think that one of the reasons why the Queen is in such a kind of strong position as the Queen, and why her own profile globally is so powerful and so kind of revered in the way that it is.
She's called the Queen. There are other queens, but she's
the Queen. Yeah, and I think that the thing with the Queen is that there came a point that I wrote about this based upon conversations I had with people inside the kind of royal household. There came a point where they made a very deliberate decision to focus very much on, if you like, the main people. Queen and Prince Philip before he stepped back, Charles, William, Charles and Camilla, William and Kate, and to some extent Harry. And that was kind of how it was seen. And all the others, Anne got on and did her stuff. Andrew went on and did his stuff.
When you say to some extent, is that because up until relatively recently, Harry was almost kind of a beloved add-on to William that we just couldn't.
He was very much
separate them
as
off.
The two brothers, yeah. And at one point, the two brothers plus Kate, when they were doing the mental health stuff together.
He called her the sister I never had, didn't he?
Yeah, and then I think, and I don't know whether this is about Meghan herself, but I think then the fact of William marriage. And something has happened since then. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think that the public, it's been really interesting just sort of listening to some of the stuff today and seeing some of the reaction on social media. Like everything in our world at the moment, it's kind of, well, are you for or are you against? And the nuance gets lost. I think people feel very sorry for them to some extent. But I do think that I saw that a clip of that Tom Bradby interview that Meghan did, where she said when her friend said, "Are you sure about this? The tabloids will go for you and what have you," and she said, "Well, why would they?" Because did she know nothing about what happened to his mum?
Yeah.
And the way that the British tabloid
press is.
There was naivety there,
wasn't there?
Well, I think it was deliberate. I think she didn't want to think about that because she was doing what she was doing at the time.
You mentioned there the nuance. Let's talk a little bit about that. When you spoke to the Princess of Wales, did you think for a second that there could be this space for her to operate?
Oh, yeah.
As a global ambassador. I mean, she just was one anyway, in a sense. Wherever she went, it got interest. She wanted to harness it. But the royals didn't let her, did they? In any formal sense?
No, but, well, they didn't. I mean, I think that, look, we'll never know. She died, but I think that she had
you think it could have developed into something
I don't know what it would have developed as, but I think that Princess Diana would always have been, if she'd wanted to be,
the Princess of Wales.
And in people's minds, she'd got above it in a way that I don't think Harry and Meghan have, and that's not a criticism of them. It's just that she was in a kind of different league for all sorts of reasons. So I think she would have. I often think about how the country might have been different if she had been around. I think it would have been, given how much you've seen how much focus there is on this story globally today, given how much the world focuses on our royal family, Princess Diana would have projected a very different sense of Britain. And I think she had a sense of that. I think one of the reasons she wanted to talk to us when we were in opposition was actually to try to work this out. What might she be able to do? And it's again, and the other thing that I was thinking about this on the way here, because this is the great benefit of having kept a diary, is I don't actually remember this happening, but before I came on, I just had a quick flick through, and there's this thing where she said at one of these dinners, she said they can take away, I think she meant the royal establishment, they can take away everything, but they will never ever take away my pictures. And that sense of, let's be honest, they do exploit the media, because back to the other analysis I did of the royal family, without public support, they are nothing. They have to have public support. And I think the Queen has always understood that. I think Prince Charles understands that.
Do you think that the Queen will try to find some kind of accommodation here? Because, in the last, month or so, she's shown us she's prepared to sack her own son. So however beloved this young man is to her, and he clearly is, will she just look at this simply through the prism of the monarchy, the crown, do you think?
I don't know.
I mean, she loves him, obviously, and, it's clear.
It's very hard. I think one of the other things one of the reasons why the media love talking about the royal family so much is actually they don't really know what's going on a lot of the time, but they have to kind of endlessly speculate. But I think the Queen is absolutely driven by that sense of sort of basic duty. I think she would find it very difficult to understand how somebody could, it's not a question of not wanting to do it, but could not see that actually that is their role.
Or give it more time before you bail out.
Yeah, and certainly I think to have, they talk about themselves as the firm. Well, this is the equivalent of a kind of, a director deciding to go public about what's wrong with the firm without actually even warning the chairman and the chief executive that they're going to do it. And I think she'll find that very, very difficult. I also think that I just think the very idea of this kind of, what does it mean when you talk about financial independence, and when you get into the issues of who pays for security, and do you have private security, and if so, how do they liaise with the public security forces, and all those questions.
Well, given what happened to his mother, that's a key question, isn't it?
All those questions, they're questions that probably they should have thought about, and maybe they have, but if the rest of the royal family didn't know this was coming, then it suggests to me they haven't.
And as a press advisor, they obviously put out some kind of sort of qualification once the palace statement came out last night. What would you be saying to them now if they said, "Oh God, how do we play this now?" The young couple?
I don't know really. I think that I think it's very hard. I don't think you can advise people without knowing what they're actually saying, what they're thinking. Yeah. I think that's a very difficult thing to do. I think that I don't believe this is a crisis for the monarchy. I don't believe this is a crisis for the Queen. I think it's a pain in the neck, particularly after the Andrew thing. But I think for them, what I would say to them is, look, just, okay, it's happened, you've done it, now dial back. I don't mean dial back, say you're not going to do it, but actually now, really, engage in detail, root through the questions, that not for the public, not for the media.
And engage.
But with them,
with Charles and the Queen.
How do we now make this happen in a way that kind of suits everybody? And it may be they find there isn't a way, and that becomes quite difficult. And then fast forward a few years, and Meghan Markle can play Meghan Markle in the series 9 of The Crown.
You're not the first to make that joke. Come on, you can do better than that. Okay. Alastair Campbell, thank you. Always good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Former Director of Communications for Tony Blair. More